Mr. Kasakian, could you call the roll, please?
Agency members Friedman.
Here.
Najarian.
Here.
Quintero.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Chairman Draymond.
Here. And Mr. City Clerk, could we hear your report, please?
The agenda for the November 3rd, 2009 regular meeting of the Glendale Redevelopment Agency was posted on Thursday, October 29, 2009 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
Thank you. And our next item?
Next item is the oral communications.
We have no minutes. There are no minutes. Okay, thank you very much.
Discussion is limited to items not part of this agenda. Each speaker is allowed 5 minutes. Members of the redevelopment agency may question or respond to the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision. Matter may be referred to staff through the executive director for investigation and report.
Okay, thank you very much. We have 3 speakers. Our first is Mike Mohill, followed by Rick Lemo.
Mike Mohill, resident of Glendale, many years. I was very upset right now to hear about Mr. Weaver had to say about my colleagues, Mr. Allen, Mr. Milano, and myself. Reminds me what happened at a meeting I was about an hour ago. And a woman says to me, says, Mr. Mohill, why are you so negative about the city of Glendale? I says, why aren't you here talking about the city of Glendale at the city council? Did you mean that everything is perfect in the city of Glendale? You think the quality of life in Glendale is perfect? Do you think it could be better? It's a shame that only 3 people today want to address Mr. Draymond and council right now, out of a population of only 200,000. It's also a shame that the 5 councilmen right here haven't gone up to Sacramento and say, we want more money, we want more everything.
Haven't?
Well, I don't read about it in the papers. Well, you know what I read in the papers? All they do in the news press is just say the facts, nothing what's going on internally of the city, unless it's about marketplace, okay? But we come here weekly because we give a darn. Isn't that why you decided to run for city council in the first place? Because you cared about the city. You didn't care, but people who preceded you, you felt weren't doing a good enough job for the people who you lived around. And they said, Mr. Draymond, please run for city council. We'll support you. Mr. Quintero, Mrs. Friedman, Mr. Weaver. They all said, please make a difference for us. Now, I look out the street and I see potholes, broken down streets, Central Avenue is falling apart. That's my quality of life. And where are we spending our money? It's all about budgeting. So we do care. And to slam us is insulting. You should praise us, Mr. Weaver, that we give a darn. Do I slam you for not taking care of East Glen Oaks Boulevard? All you could say is, it's okay. Well, ask Mr. Steve Zarin. He got his people, thank you, to fix the potholes on East Glen Oaks Boulevard. He also went ahead and resurfaced and fixed all the sidewalks on East Glen Oaks Boulevard because my wife did a trip and fall. And when I did the claims against the city about 2-3 weeks ago, there was $52,000 in claims against the city just for trip and fall. Now, my claim was only $130. Just the actual medical expenses for that trip and fall, not for punitive damages. So please, Mr. Weaver, don't insult me and the public who gives a darn to come here. Now, if you think what we're doing is wrong, then maybe it's time we should change the horses who are running the city of Glendale. This is insulting. People care. They come here. I'm retired. But a lot of people are not retired and have to work for a living. And they come up to me and say, oh, Mr. Mohill, I watched you on TV the other evening. I read you in the newspapers. Wow. Have you read anything? I haven't seen anything you've written recently in the Glendale news press. I said, well, probably they don't like what I'm writing nowadays because I may be insulting some of our councilmen for not doing their job, for letting the staff run the city. Staff recommends something, and the city council just rubber stamps it. After all, about 3 weeks ago, that's what you all did on the consent items, $30 million. Nobody questioned staff of how they came to these conclusions. You just said, they're the experts. So please, the quality of life at Glendale is important to me, and I give a darn. And I'm not negative. I like Glendale. I've been here 30-plus years. If I didn't like Glendale, I would have moved out a long time ago. I just want to make sure that the city is run such that people want to live here. When I read that the taxes in Glendale are shrinking compared to the other cities around us, there's something wrong with the city of Glendale. Are we not marketing our city properly? Why does Burbank and Pasadena have less population, but yet they have higher retail sales? Why is that? Are we doing something wrong? Is it time to change the leadership of the city? I don't know. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Rick Lemo, followed by Herbert Milano.
Good afternoon, agency chair and agency members and staff. Before I get into the comments I originally came here for, I have to tell you, I represent a company, before I tell you the second thing I'm doing here, I represent a company that's very proud to be in Glendale. We do think the quality of life here is great. And I hope you all had a chance to read the article this past week that actually came in the San Fernando Valley Business Journal that alluded to the fact that Glendale was actually leading most of the local communities in weathering the recession. I think that only a small part of that is due to the retail climate here in town, but also the fact that folks do want to live here. This is like the biggest little city in California, and I think that sort of makes everybody care more about their city and feel stronger about their city. And actually, that's what I'm here about today. I'm here in the position as chair of the executive council of one of the newest organizations in Glendale. It's really some good news, and it directly speaks to quality of life in Glendale. The name of the organization actually came from what started in Glendale sort of with the Glendale Galleria ages ago, and has sort of had a small peak with the Americana, but realizing that the Americana brand is really kind of a halfway step. It's called the Glendale Renaissance Orchestra, and it is drastically different than anything we've had here for quite some time. It will be focusing on music that is light classical and pops in nature in order to appeal to a crowd, young and old, and of all genres. And I'm very proud to tell you that in 6 days from today, ticket sales will begin at the Alex Theater box office and at the Americana at Brand Concierge. They began their training today to make sure that, in addition to everything else they do over there, they can sell tickets. It will be a 4-performance season that will begin on April 29th. The first 3 performances are on Thursday evenings outdoors under the stars. And I'm pretty sure the time change will still get us under the stars in April, with the final performance being at the Alex Theater on December 8th of next year. The performances outdoors are April 29th, which will be a light classical presentation with some of the hits of Andrea Bocelli. July 1st will be a patriotic celebration, and September 30th will be Broadway show tunes and pop. Those first 3 presentations will be on Thursday evenings under the stars at the Americana at Brand. December 8th will be a holiday concert and old-fashioned community sing-along that will be at the Alex Theater to round out the 2010 season. The group that got together had some basic tenets, one of which was not just to improve the quality of life, but to provide access. Access in the cost of tickets, access in the number of people that could hear most of the presentations free, and access in that 300 Glendale Unified students will actually receive free admission to the holiday concert at the Alex Theater. And part of quality of life in any town is to have organizations that can work together. Quite frankly, if it wasn't for Glendale Arts, the Alex Theater, the advice of a lot of city staff members and agency/council members, this never would have happened on such a quick timeline and a prep for next season. So I hope that you'll all join us for 1 or 2 or maybe all 4 performances next year. The inaugural season kicks off April 29th, but ticket sales begin Monday, November 9th. And when you have a chance, pat the folks on the Alex Theater and Glendale Arts on the back because they really made this happen. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mohill. Mr. Lemo, pardon me. I called you Mr. Mohill. I don't know if you caught that. Some of my colleagues did because they all went,
I've been called many things. I'll take either of those.
okay, very good.
Pound gorilla.
All right, our next speaker is Herbert Milano.
Good afternoon, Agency Chair Raymond, almost said Najarian. Agency members, staff, my name is Herbert Milano. Well, it's certainly nice to hear such a beautiful presentation coming from Mr. Limo. Mr. Caruso and his group definitely have polished presentations. They've always been a first-class organization in the way they think about the urban architecture and urban mobility and so forth. I believe Mr. Rick Caruso has received awards from the Urban Institute, and he's actually giving classes at the Institute as well with regard to urban issues. So this is a group that I think you can tap into for visionary thinking with regard to how Glendale could evolve. Since the redevelopment agency is charged with looking at the economic development of the city, I've always taken a significant interest, and it's an interest perhaps a little different than that of Councilman Weaver. You see, there's a Russian saying that goes something like this: we all perceive the world from the steeple of our own village. And I lived in southern Glendale for 20 years. I raised my kids here. I run the streets of Glendale. I think I probably walked on more streets or run more streets than probably all of you combined. There was a year in which I ran about 150 miles just trying to get all the roads, all the 360 roads of Glendale. My point is that I'm able to see Glendale from a different perspective, from the perspective of a landlord, looking at the economic situation of my tenants, watching graffiti being sprayed on my building, watching the unemployed and sometimes the homeless taking lodging in the subterranean parking. I've seen my neighbors fall and trip on sidewalks. I've seen my elderly neighbors being hit by automobiles. I went to visit them at Glendale Adventist, and watched them as they progressively went into death. So I have a perception of looking at the city that's a little bit different from individuals who've lived in the nicer neighborhoods. When you exit the 134 freeway onto Glendale Avenue, if you turn north, you're immediately impacted by a much nicer environment. A median with trees and grass, but if you turn south, it's a narrower streets, fewer trees, fewer amenities. It's a different city. It's a different needs. It's more crowded. There are fewer. And so someone has to speak for them, but this is a community that generally they either are renters, they don't speak English well, or they're working trying to make their day and don't have the luxury to come over to meetings like this and express their viewpoint. I'm interested in seeing what initiatives you bring and what vision you have for the future as it regards to invigorating the economy of the city. I read recently that this redevelopment agency was planning to invigorate the parts of Glendale for purposes of entertainment, and I think that's wonderful because it needs it. And it's nice to hear Mr. Limo come in and speak and take an initiative with regard to the arts as well that the city needs more of. But I think that there's something else that is needed, and that's a target number with regard to employment. Because I see it impacted by my tenants. I looked at the checks that come in. I look when they come in late. I'm listening to them when they need a break with regard to their rent or when they need a special consideration because they won't be able to pay their rent on time. So if you have a little bit of empathy, you listen to those conditions and you try to figure out, well, how is it that we are addressing those needs of employment? And it is my hope that when the city receives stimulus money, that the city looks first to see how the stimulus money is turning into employment at the local level. Because this is where the tire meets the road. It's this agency that is charged with invigorating the economy of the city. And I think that we need measures just like we need other measures with regard to how many jobs are you helping to create. not internally within the city, but outside as well. Or if you need be, temporary type of jobs that will engage, residents of the community to be able to provide a livelihood for their families. And that's what we come here to talk about, because these are not the topics that you hear from week to week. You open up the session and you close the session, and these topics don't come up. And that's the perspective that we bring. And it's unfortunate that Councilman Weaver doesn't appreciate that. But then again, when you've been here for a long time, after a while you figure that you are the city. Well, it's more than that, I think. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Milano. All right, I have no other cards. I'll close oral communications. Let's move on to the next item.
Next item on the business agenda is Director of Development Services regarding financing strategy for the Central Glendale Redevelopment Project area. At 6A1 is a motion authorizing the preparation of documents for bond issuance and the selection of an underwriter for issuance of bonds as necessary.
All right, thank you very much. Let's go to our Director of Development Services, Phil Ensved.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Redevelopment Agency, in September of 2008, you authorized a contract with Harrell and Associates, Suzanne Harrell, to be a financial advisor to the agency. Our plan at the time was to issue tax-exempt bonds, and in fact, our capital improvement program is predicated on a sizable contribution from the Redevelopment Agency to public facilities. Given economic conditions, the state's budget woes, and the declining tax-exempt bond market, we put all of that on hold. Those conditions have improved. We have a better idea of the state's budget and how it will affect us. The bond market has improved, and staff thinks it's appropriate time to come back and look at issuing a bond. So we have prepared a financial plan. I would like Ms. Suzanne Harrell to just walk you through the highlights very quickly. And while she's coming up, I want to point out this is not authorizing the issuance of bonds. You are approving, if you so elect, you would be approving the preparation of documents. We will come back to you again for that final approval. Ms. Harrell.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Agency Chair and members of the Agency Board.
Oh, PowerPoint.
I'm sorry. I'll try to keep this brief. The agency financial plan that has been presented to the board today was based on a projection of all revenues and expenditures of the redevelopment agency's central project area through the end of the redevelopment plan. The purpose was to demonstrate the ability to issue bonds to fund approximately $25 million of public improvements that the agency will contribute to the city's CIP budget and still have enough to pay all other agency obligations based on some very conservative assumptions regarding the projected revenues and expenditures. The plan incorporates the agency's obligation to set aside 20% of the revenue for housing, takes into account all the tax sharing obligations that you have, funds an approximate $3 million annual operating budget through the end of the plan. We incorporated a reserve for appeals. Not very many businesses have applied for or appealed their assessed valuation, but we do expect that will occur, and we've reserved about 9% of the agency's assessed value for that purpose for about a 5-year period. Incorporated the payment of bonded debt, not just your existing debt, but what would be required to fund approximately $25 million of new debt for these public improvements, as well as kind of based on all of your other requirements, estimated if you had any future bonding capacity, and that's about $7 million left over. We incorporated a payment of CRAF, that's the supplemental ERAF payment. The state is taking about $13 million from your redevelopment agency, and we've incorporated those payments. Hopefully, the CRA and redevelopment agencies will be successful in getting that declared unconstitutional, and that money will be freed up for you. There are $28 million of pay-as-you-go capital projects over and above the $25 million public improvements incorporated in the plan, a full repayment of the existing city loan, about $3 million a year for the next 5 years of discretionary projects and that have yet to be identified, as well as there's a provision for future assistance for economic development through the end of the plan. So we feel that the projections of revenue are quite conservative. We haven't really increased assessed value for next year, holding it flat because of the economic factors, and incorporated quite a hefty reserve for appeals. And again, if one of these assumptions shouldn't materialize, there is the discretionary project money and the future assistance money that will be available to offset an increase in expenditures. So, next one. Project funding includes the Central Library, the Adult Recreation Center, the soccer field, and the Adult Recreation Center Town Center connection for a total of $24,650,000 in project costs. With bonds and reserves, the bonds are estimated to be about $29 million. So the recommendation included in your staff report is to approve the financial plan and authorize the staff to prepare documents in connection with a bond issue to fund the public improvements. And that concludes my report.
Okay, and a very powerful PowerPoint it was. All right. Thank you very much. Mr. Lanspain, if you feel comfortable, let me turn to my colleagues at this point.
Yes.
And see if they have any comments or questions. Mr. Najarian.
I have just a few questions. With regard to the projects identified, those four, have we previously identified those as bond projects to be paid for with bond proceeds?
Yes, we did. As part of the CIP, we tried to identify those public improvements within the central project area that would be eligible for bond funding, and this is what we were able to come up with. And so as part of our CIP approval, we indicated that these would be funded by bonds.
Okay. The next question is the anticipated tax increment revenues. Do they include any TOT tax?
No, these are simply tax increment bonds. The transient occupancy tax, hotel tax, is a tax that goes directly to the general fund and would not be part of the consideration or the funds used to service this debt.
And this doesn't take into account any new projects which may come in. How would a new project, would we assume that income stream in the bond issuance, or would that be just outside of the window that we're looking at?
What we've done is, as Ms. Harrell has pointed out, is we've made a lot of conservative assumptions. One of those being, what is the existing revenue that is flowing from the project area right now today? Not betting on any future development. What is it today? And we size the bond based on that, again, to be very conservative. If we did have additional development with new value and additional tax increment, that would improve the funds that you all have available for additional redevelopment projects, and perhaps may increase that $7 million we think might still be capacity we might have in bonding. It might increase that, or you would have those funds to use on a pay-as-you-go basis.
Okay. Are these, is this bond issuance the death throes bond that we issue before the agency, the project district expires, or is this something?
I hope not. I hope that there's one more out there for us. Really, what we're trying to do, what would be best for the agency and the city of Glendale, is if we can maximize the debt so that we're collecting tax increment for as long as the law allows to pay off debt that we've incurred after 1994. This gets a little bit technical. Prior to that is when we incurred most of the city debt. We would like to keep that outstanding so that after 2025, we can continue to collect tax increment beyond that prescribed by the community redevelopment law to to pay off that city loan and benefit the city of Glendale with additional tax increment.
Okay. So we may have one more bite at the apple.
May have one more bite at the apple.
Hopefully in a few years.
We think right now that capacity is about $7 million, maybe in 2 years. If we have development that comes online, large sales, appreciable property values, we may have more. There may be more capacity there.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Najarian. Mr. Quintero.
If the CRA and the member agencies lose a lawsuit, where does that put us?
Well, we've set aside, as our plan outlines, we've set aside $13 million, which is the way that the state's budget has been adopted is what our share would be. We've set that aside. If we lose, we would make that payment. Now, if the state comes back again and takes an additional amount, more, less, whatever, we still have the amount that we indicated in reserve, discretionary reserve, as well as that we've set aside for future assistance that you could use to make that payment. If the state comes back with something tremendously outrageous, I think all redevelopment in California is in trouble, and there's going to have to be some kind of workout. But before that happens, we would like to have as much bonded indebtedness that is protected through bondholders and the agreements that we make with them.
Okay, thank you very much. Might want to have a seat for a moment. We're going to go to the public. We have one speaker card, Mike Mohill.
Mike Mohill, resident, Glendale. I read this package also. I'm concerned about a few items, and first I'd like to thank Mr. Najarian for asking a few questions. It means he read the documents, and I appreciate that. On July the 1st of this year, Council said the budget was balanced, recommended by the staff. 4 months later, you're asking for $28 million. Does that mean this budget was not balanced? Why do we need to ask for $28 million? That's the first question. Number two, the passageway for $4.5 million. That's, I understand, is for the Neon Museum passageway. Well, Mr. Draymond, I thought you said we had enough money for the Neon Museum. Why do we need to bond ourselves for $4.5 million for that passageway? You know, for $4.5 million, we could have a new soccer field in South Glendale. Then Mr. Najjar and Mr. Draymond can kick me again. The $9 million for the Central Library. Now, we've been talking about renovating the Central Library for how many years now? Well, how come we can't get that money out of the CIP? Why do we need to have a bond for that? Wasn't it budgeted in the budget in the first place? You're asking for $7 million for the Adult Recreation Center. I don't understand that. The building is being built right now, and now you're telling me you don't have any money to finish the building? Was that part of the budget of 2009? Just asking. Central, so that's all. And the soccer field, I'm glad to see the soccer field qualifies for this. What I don't see is rebuilding of Central Avenue. The roads. That road is miserable. That's a major artery for the city of Glendale. We have plenty of high-rises there, financial center for Glendale, and we treat it like a second-class citizen. Grand Boulevard, Colorado Boulevard, are our main arteries, absolutely. But I believe Central Avenues, too. Why do we let our roads become second class when they should be first class? Talking about financing this. McGuire Properties, $46 million loss. Job stimulus, not making it. Richard Ellis, no money. Jobs are vanishing throughout the city and the state. Daily News. The state is in a financial wreck. Where are we going to get the money to support these increments of taxes and fees? Is this going to be a work project administration job? Are we trying to create jobs for the city employees, for the planning department, and the public works department? I mean, please, gentlemen, what if we default? The economy just goes sour, which it is. I've been coming here for many years now saying the economy is getting worse and worse, and guess what? It's on a roll now. We're approaching 20% unemployment. With people unemployed, they can't go ahead and buy anything at the Americana or the Galleria or down Brand Boulevard. And now you're going to ask the city, the taxpayers, to say, you know what? I'm going to cross my fingers that we have all the impact fees. What if we don't? Are you going to ask the citizens of Glendale to say, hey, take the money out of the general fund and pay our obligations? Let's ask the questions to the redevelopment agency and say, what happens if we don't have the money? This is not going to be to create jobs for the city. Most of the people who will work on these projects don't live in the city of Glendale. They live someplace else. I care. That's why I'm here.
Okay, Mr. Mohill,
Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let me come back to...
Reality.
Yes, reality. That's as good a phrase as any, Mr. Quintero. All right. Mr. Lansafame, if you must, yes.
At the risk of I think it's important to note.
Bring us on back, Mr. Lansafame.
It's important to note because I don't want anybody to that's listening out watching television to get the wrong idea. When you adopted the capital improvement program, you were planning on issuing bonds to do that. When we put that on hold, you came to you and your policy was to use cash to pay for those projects. This is nothing new. This hasn't changed in 18 months. That the ability to issue bonds is now ripe again. What that means is the agency will have about $25 million in reserve for future projects. So I think it's incorrect to say that we're asking for more money. Why wasn't this budgeted? Weren't we balanced before? We absolutely were. And when we put this on hold, we substituted it for cash that the agency had. I think the other important thing to note is the question, what if we default? There is not only the contingencies that we built in that Ms. Harrell went through, but we will also have a debt coverage ratio that is of 125 to 140%. That is revenues of 125 to 140% of what we need to pay. So I think those points are important when you are considering this action today.
All right, thank you. I would only add, Mr. Lansafame, that it's not that anyone looking in is getting the wrong impression. It's that there's one or two people out there that continuously step before the dais. We heard one of them this afternoon several times, who works very hard to try to give the wrong impression. So that's the only nuance I would add to that. All right. Is there any other discussion on this particular point? All right. Mr. Weaver.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Mr. Kosaki, if you would, please.
Agency members Friedman?
Yes.
Najarian?
Yes.
Quintero?
Yes.
Weaver? Chairman Draymond.
Yes. All right, our next item, please.
At B is Director of Development Services regarding Polanco Redevelopment Act. At B1 is Agency Resolution authorizing use of the Polanco Redevelopment Act in the San Fernando Road Corridor and Central Glendale project areas. And at B2 is Agency Resolution adopting procurement procedures for actions taken under the Polanco Act.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's go again to Mr. Lansafame.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Redevelopment Agency, the City of Glendale has a history of contaminated properties in both of our redevelopment project areas. In the San Fernando Road, mainly from industrial uses throughout time. In the Central Redevelopment Project area, from more urban uses like gas stations, dry cleaners, and auto repair. The California redevelopment law has acknowledged that the presence or the perceived presence of contamination can be a hindrance to redeveloping properties. property owners that may own contaminated properties may be hesitant to do anything with them for fear of the financial liability and the need to clean them up. Developers may not want to take on that liability, and so you have properties that remain stagnant. The Polanco Act was adopted to give redevelopment agencies a powerful tool to use in cleaning up contaminated properties. It is a statutory mechanism that allows the agency to work with property owners and developers to clean and redevelop properties. It does three basic things. It allows the agency to ask for and receive as much information as property owners may have. It allows the agency to go and conduct studies to get information that property owners may not possess. And then the third thing is it protects agencies and future owners from state liability from that contamination. It doesn't protect from federal liability, but there are other tools such as contamination, environmental insurance, and other things that we can use. This is an existing authority that the redevelopment agencies were granted. However, to make sure that all the property owners are noticed, we think and recommend that you adopt a specific resolution acknowledging this authority, and then second, adopting some procedures that staff would follow should we ever want to do some examination or analysis or work with a property owner to get things cleaned up that would allow us to recoup those costs. That's what the two resolutions before you do. We have certainly our legal staff here from the City Attorney's Office. We have Special Counsel John Harris from Myers-Nave, and staff are prepared if you have any questions on these resolutions.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Lansfame. Mr. Quintero.
I will be very happy to move this item. I think it's a very good idea. We all know the kind of issues that we've faced along the San Fernando Road corridor throughout the years. And when I say issues that we've faced, the City of Los Angeles faces in Burbank and literally all the way down to the Port of Los Angeles and the Port of Long Beach. So I think this is a very good idea. Happy the staff put this together.
Are you moving 6B 1 and 2?
I'll move 6B 1 and 2.
Second.
We have a motion and a second, but let me see if there are any other comments. Mr. Najarian?
No, I support the motion and the procedures.
Ms. Friedman? Mr. Weaver?
No.
No.
Questions.
All right. I would just like to say that I agree with that. I'm very happy about that. It is a tool that is not common to every state. And it is a rather unique tool to California, and it is one that is going to allow this agency to do something that is directly relating to its core mission, which is to eliminate blight. So I will also be supporting that. I thank you. We have a motion and a second. I have no speaker cards. Mr. Kasakian, could you call the roll?
Agency members: Friedman?
Yes.
Najarian?
Yes.
Quintero?
Yes.
Weaver?
Aye.
Chairman Draymond?
Yes. Do we have any agency member staff or staff comments? No, I have just a couple. I just want to make a comment because we have an ongoing barrage of questions that are from one person, probably scripted by another person. We all know who those are. But the point I want to get is that what is probably confusing the speaker that comes here is the fact that in previous councils at previous times, we have perhaps had members that would stand on their hands on the dais and wiggle their feet and say, "Look at me, look at me, look at me." I'm very proud of this agency. I'm very proud of my colleagues because what they do is their homework. If they have questions, they don't sit here on the dais and try to demonstrate that they've learned something or demonstrate that they're doing their homework. They just do their homework. They will contact the appropriate staff during the week as everybody, including this agency, is prepping for these meetings, and they'll ask their questions then and get their questions answered then. And if something comes up that was beyond the scope of that, then they'll ask their questions. That's not an indication of rubber stamping anything. That is an indication of this agency and this council doing their homework and interacting with staff properly. And I just wanted to make that point. With that, if there is a motion to adjourn,
So moved.
Second.
thank you. We're adjourned.
As mentioned previously, we will not be, it's been moved off the agenda, the quality of life